Okay, good morning. My name is Mimi Marie, and I'm the host of the Rising Woman Project. And I'm super excited for today because this is my first audio video recording, and even more excited to welcome my beautiful friend Linda Schwartz of the She Shed Comedy Podcast.
Hi, everybody. How's it going? Thanks for having me, Mimi. I'm so glad to be here.
You're so welcome. Thank you for being like my guinea pig.
You bet.
It's going to be awesome. So I think I wanted to start just with talking a little bit about how we met. And so I think we met in 2012 when we were both doing Landmark. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, I think so. It was either 2011 or 2012, because in 2011 I did the Landmark Forum, and right after the Landmark Forum I did everything that came after that. So the Advanced Course, I did the ILP, I did SCLP, I did all of the communications courses. I pretty much did everything that they offered, and some seminars. And I think you and I met probably either in the Landmark Forum or in the Advanced Course or in the ILP. So,
do you remember which month you did the forum?
I did the forum in May of 2011, and then I think I did the Advanced Course right after that. So either June or July.
Okay.
And then I started ILP in August or October.
Okay. We were like kind of dancing around each other because I did my forum in June. And then I think we did our advanced course in August. So maybe we did a seminar or something.
No, I think the advanced course was probably in August that I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I was thinking about it. August came forward, and I was like, maybe it was in August.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And then our friendship has kind of evolved, and like our paths have weaved in and out. And it's just been really, really fun and a pleasure to watch you and all of the amazing things that you've done. And
likewise.
Yeah. And so you are the owner of my very favorite Heaven on Earth, the Indigo Buffalo Cabins. Yeah. And you really were the catalyst for my love for the mountains and like deep desire I have to like run away and live there someday.
You're welcome. I think every woman should experience living in the mountains. I mean, if it calls to your heart. I didn't know that it called to my heart until I got up there. And for those of you who are in Southern California, there is a little mountain town called Idlewild, and it's about 2 hours north of San Diego and about 2 hours from LA as well. So it's just, there's just something about being up there in the mountains, and it became my sanctuary. I lived there for 2 years, as you know, and we can get into all of that as we progress, but
yeah, I didn't know that it called to me either until I came to visit you there.
Yeah,
it's so special.
I remember that. It is a very spiritual place, very calming, relaxing, and also conducive to artists.
Yes.
And creatives. Yeah,
I'm so excited to get up there again in June.
I'm excited to have you. You're always welcome to stay with us.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so obviously there's a lot more to your story, and I feel like there's so many different ways we can take this. But I'd like you to start with kind of talking a little bit about where you came from, your childhood, your family, things like that.
Sure. So I was born and raised in Savannah, Georgia. And, when I was growing up, the context or the inner belief that I used to have about myself was always, if people knew the truth about me, they would never love me. And that really stemmed out of, my parents being immigrants. They came here in 1979 from Laos. They were escaping a war. They were living in a refugee camp for 3 years during the Vietnam War. And finally they got sponsored and they were sponsored to Savannah, Georgia. And with them came my 3 brothers. And so I was their first American-born child. And growing up in the South, being Asian, was very challenging because I didn't see anybody like me and didn't see anybody like me on television. So I really grew into my identity crisis right away. Like as soon as I could recognize differences in people. And so, and my background is basically, my parents were, um, they struggled a lot. My dad was an alcoholic. My mom was incredibly abusive, verbally, mentally, emotionally, psychologically. She had her, issues. And so growing up in that environment was very volatile and toxic, to say the very least. And on top of that, layering on top of that, wondering where I belong. I was like 1 out of 5 Asian kids, or I would say ethnic rather than Asian, because there weren't very many ethnic kids in my school. So I noticed that difference right away, and I always felt like there was something wrong with me and something different about me. I just didn't know what it was. And, my family dynamic was quite, like I said, volatile and toxic. And so I didn't know, I didn't have a healthy example to live by. And what came forward was this belief that, I'm unworthy, nobody loves me, I'm unlovable, if you knew the truth about me. And that's kind of where that stemmed from. And so I was, bounced around from family member to family member the majority of my young life. And as I mentioned before, my dad was an alcoholic, so he was very disconnected from me. And I was bouncing around so much that I disconnected myself from my family completely. I never had that feeling or that sense of what family meant. And so, and just fast forward a little bit, I ended up living with my brother for a little while. And during that time, I started acting out because, when you're a teenager, you're just trying to figure things out on your own. You don't have a good example at home of what to do, what to look for, how to communicate. And I started acting out, and I ended up getting pulled out of my brother's home, put into foster care. And I lived in foster care for a little while. And what was really interesting was that when I started looking back on that, when I was placed into my foster family, I really got the sense of family for the first time, because it was really strange.
How old were you?
Because I was about 12 or 13.
Okay.
So this was like right at the end of, I think, 8th grade, or near the end of 8th grade. And so, my dad had just left. He couldn't deal. So he left me alone. And then that's how I ended up living with my brother. And there's obviously a lot more to the story. But, when I got to my foster family's home, it was really this feeling of, oh, wow, this is what a normal family feels like, because they just spoke with each other with such dignity and respect. They ate together. They sat down and had dinner together. My foster mom, the first thing she did was she took me shopping for clothes. I'd never had that experience before. And she just kind of opened my eyes to what family could look like, the context of family, what that could look like, and what that could be for me. And so shortly after that, the courts got in touch with my mom, who was living in California. And I knew that our relationship was incredibly volatile. And by the way, my parents got divorced when I was like 2.5. And so my dad stayed back in Georgia. My mom moved to California. And now, I'm now 13 years old, and the courts are reaching out to my mom in California. And they tell me, what my options are. Basically, stay in the system in Savannah, or, go to California to live with my mom. And I thought in the back of my mind that this could be a clean slate for me. And so I obviously took the option to move to California. So I moved to California when I was about 14 years old, permanently. And what came forward with that experience with my mom was that I realized that our relationship was still volatile. It was still very toxic. She was still very abusive mentally, emotionally, psychologically, sometimes physically. And it just took a toll on me, and it just stripped my identity and my self-worth to the point where I was like, I can't live like this. And so at the age of 16, I decided to self-emancipate.
Wow.
I was like, I can't live like this anymore.
Yeah.
And so I left home. I left my mom at 16 and started taking care of myself. I started working 3 jobs. I self-graduated from high school, meaning that I took the proficiency exam and I got out early. And so I really became responsible for myself in every capacity at a very young age. So that's kind of my background.
Yeah. Were you aware of did you start having a sense of your power at that point?
Oh, no.
No.
Oh, no. Like, I was still that girl who thought that that I was unlovable, that if people knew the truth about me, they would never care about me or love me. But what I did have was conditioning. So because I was neglected for the majority of my life, my younger life, I became very self-sufficient and self-sustaining. Like I remember, being 5 years old and cooking instant noodles for myself. Mama, like they're Asian noodles called Mama noodles. They're a brand. And we would, my dad would have just boxes of these noodles, and I would pull up a stool to the stove, put on a pot of water, boil the water, put the noodles in, and pour it in a bowl when it was finished, and feed myself. And so I became very self-sufficient. So by the time I was 16, I was so conditioned to be self-sufficient that it was just sheer determination and this confidence that I've been taking care of myself this whole time. So I know I'm only 16, but I think I can figure out how to take care of myself now. And so there wasn't like this sense of power. It was just this sense of, I know I can do this because I've already been doing it.
Yeah. So were you in survival mode? Or
for sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely in survival mode. I was working 3 jobs. And I also had this thing where I was like, I'm going to show you, like to my mom, to everybody, because there was just this, I don't know if anybody can relate to this, but my mom was my biggest trigger. Like she would come home and as soon as I heard the car pull up when I was living with her, I would lock myself in my bedroom. And if she said one thing to me, I flew off the handle. Like it was insane, this dynamic, because I always, like my experience of her back then was, who are you? Who are you to tell me what to do when you've never been there for me? And so, now that I wasn't living under her roof, she was telling me what I needed to do and how I should do it and who I should hang out with and all of this stuff. And like in the back of my mind, I was like, how dare you? And so there was a lot of resentment there. And she would say things that were just so diminishing and so destructive to my spirit. And so when I left, I was like, I'm going to show you. I know that I don't need you. Like there was just that, just sheer determination. And like at 16, I thought I knew everything. I had no real life experience. It was just that I was confident in the fact that I was already taking care of myself and that I could figure it out.
Yeah.
And it was definitely survival mode.
Mm-hmm. So how long do you think you were driven by that I'm going to show you mentality?
Um, Gosh, that's a great question. I've never really thought about that. Um, I would say, I would say at least into my 20s,
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't start doing personal development until I was in my 20s. I didn't know what was actually driving me. I didn't know the psychology behind why I was doing the things that I was doing. I was just doing them purely based on instinct and being driven by, like you said, by survival mode. Like I needed to take care of myself. And that was the genesis and the impetus of for me to just keep doing what I was doing. Did I make great choices along the way? No, not always.
Yeah.
But I knew that if I could just make a few decent choices and right choices for myself, that I would be okay. And I always had this feeling and this intuitive notion that I would be okay no matter what, because I did believe a lot in myself and my ability to take care of myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So was there like a turning point, a rock bottom? Like, was there a significant time in your life where it was like, okay, something has to change?
Absolutely. And I remember I had just met a boy. I was living in Santa Rosa. He was living in San Diego. We actually went to high school together. We dated in high school, and we were like, we were just too young for it. And then we met up again, and I moved to San Diego for him. And so when I got to San Diego, I thought that, again, this is going to be a clean slate. I am going to start over and start fresh. Like my past is not going to catch up with me. It's not going to be there, because I thought it was always like this mind over, like they say you can forget your past and move forward. And, sometimes it's not that easy to forget your past, because, now I know there are psychological things that happen to solidify beliefs. Like I didn't know that back then.
Yeah.
And what I did know was that I was miserable. I was unhappy all the time. I always felt like there was something invisible holding me back. And I was always ambitious. So it was like, I know I can do stuff. And I would get started on things, or, I don't know about you, but I have always seen myself as an independent entrepreneur type spirit. And the first business that I got involved with, I was 18. And so I was joining businesses, like I was joining 2 or 3 MLMs every year for like 10 years. Because I was so attracted to that idea that I could be my own boss. And so every time I would start it, I would never actually start. And I always thought, like, why is that? What is it that's holding me back? And I was miserable. I wasn't, I was just, I was putting on this happy face. Like if you met me in my early 20s, I was that wild child. Like I was, happy-go-lucky, but on the inside, like I would go home at night and cry myself to sleep because I didn't know, how to deal with the emotions that I was feeling at the time. Like I was really sad, really depressed. I felt like I felt fake. I felt phony. Like that was really the bottom line. I was like, my emotional state was like there was the public face, and then there was the private face. Like and behind closed doors, I was this toxic. I was like my mom. I was toxic. I felt disgusting in my own skin. I didn't know how to communicate well with people. I didn't even know, like my self-talk. I didn't know about self-talk back then. It was just like, who do you think you are? Like why are you even doing the things that you're doing, or trying to do the things that you're doing? Don't you know like where you came from? And don't, like, what if people found out about your family background? you know,
Some of
like
the
we were the family that other families wouldn't want to be. Like we were the family on the other side of the tracks. Right. Like we were the kids who other parents were like, you can't hang out with those kids.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. Yeah.
And like two of my brothers spent time in prison. One went to like maximum security prison. He was at San Quentin. And, like that was what I was living with. And so the turning point really came when I was, I remember the day. It was a sunny day in San Diego. I was sitting in my apartment waiting for my boyfriend to come home, and we had this big green recliner like right in front of the TV, and I was flipping through the channels, and I just remember thinking to myself, like, I just want to be happy. Like, what is it going to take for me to just be happy? And I stopped on KPBS, and there was this old bald man talking about the power of intention. And I was like, what? Like he said things like, if you focus on the power of intention and the faces of intention, you can change the trajectory of your life. You can change your life. If you're unhappy and depressed, you can eat, like basically he said, I could be happy. Like that's what I heard, and I was like, oh my God, this is it. Like, this is what I've been looking for. And he called it the entire enchilada, or the whole enchilada, right? Like, which means that I got the book, the DVDs, the workbook, whatever else came with it, like KPBS swag and stuff. And so, and it was like $300. And I was like, God, that's money I don't have, but I do have enough money on my credit card to get it. And so, like, right when I pulled out my credit card to buy it, my boyfriend walks in and he was like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm buying this program. I'm buying this book. Like, The Power of Intention I think this is what I've been looking for. And he was like, oh God, here we go. And I was, and I noticed that. I noticed the feeling that made me feel. It's like, wow, maybe it's not in my cards for me to be happy and like have a good life. Like maybe I'm stuck in this shit forever. But I didn't listen to him. I bought the $300 whole enchilada. And that was kind of like the start of my journey into personal development, like really deepening work. I was always interested in like astrology. I was always interested in stuff that would help me figure things out about myself, but I never really understood that there was an entire industry dedicated to self-help. And so that was the first thing I ever bought that really catapulted me into transformational work. And alongside that book, I bought a book called The Artist Way, because I was also around that time, I was so like, I just wanted to find a solution, that I started looking into past life regression, because I was like, if it's not like in this life, like maybe it was in a past life that, that I am the way that I am and that I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling. And so I went up to see this woman in LA, and she recommended this book called The Artist Way. So I got that book also. And when I got The Power of Intention and The Artist Way, I decided that I would just commit to doing all of the exercises in The Artist Way. I started writing morning pages, 3 pages a day. I did that for 7 years straight. And then I did, the exercises, and just really delved really deep into the principles of the power of intention. And I noticed right away that my life started to shift and transform. Like I really felt that inner shift that I had been wanting to feel and experience. And so things started moving internally for me, like I was starting to unravel some deep-seated beliefs. I didn't know that that was happening at the time. I just knew that my outer experience was I was more bouncy and light. Like that's what I felt in my body. And, I was still wild and still like open to experiencing things, but I also had a newer context about that experience. And it came with just really implementing the principles of the power of intention and the artist way. So that was like where my turning point was, and as far as like shifting into personal development and transformational work.
Mm-hmm. And so what kind of things started to show up in your life, or how you were living your life based on what was happening internally for you?
Well, I just started to notice that things would just fall into place. I would, and that was kind of also around the same time that I found The Secret.
Hmm.
Do you remember that movie?
Yeah.
And it was the first time that I started understanding or diving into the law of attraction.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really, things really started to shift. I broke up with my boyfriend. We ended up leaving each other. And I moved out on my own. I moved into an apartment in Hillcrest by myself. And when I found The Secret, I remember buying a DVD for myself, buying a DVD for my friend, and buying a DVD that I would just gift to somebody. Like, I was so all about this. I was all about it. And what I did was I put the DVD in the DVD player, had my TV on, and I would just play it in the background, like over and on loop, on repeat, all day for like 2 months straight. Because I was like, I was so obsessed with changing, because I just wanted to be happy. I just didn't want to be the way that I was. Like, I wanted my public life to really be reflective of my inner life.
Yeah.
And that was the first time it kind of came forward. And so I started really just focusing on the law of attraction and the ways that those things came forward. And like my experience was, I just started to see more happy people come into my life, more positive people that really understood the power of intention. And things would just fall into place. I would think about something and it would just show up. And I was like, this is fucking crazy. Like, this stuff really works.
Yeah.
And, like even little things, like I would think about going out to dinner with a friend, or, and they would call me up, right away or within at least 24 hours. I was like, holy shit. And I would get parking everywhere, especially like in Hillcrest. And I was like, what is going on? This stuff is really intense. And so I was like, wow, it's really working. I'm like magical, but there were still like these underlying things that were holding me back. And I was like, maybe, like I just need to focus on this stuff even more. And so, but I started to experience a really big shift. And one of those shifts came from just breaking up with my boyfriend, and like really allowing myself to experience and to learn more about myself, and to give myself that time, because I never did that. I went from relationship to relationship to relationship. And so, and then I met a guy that I thought was, the cat's meow. And he was during that time, like he was really great. And it was the first like really healthy relationship that I'd ever had. And we were together for about 4 years. And so like things like that, like I just started to put out healthy vibes and things that I wanted. I really understood the power of creating a context, even though I didn't know what it meant back then. It was like just I did a lot of lists. I wrote a lot of lists.
Uh-huh.
And when those things started to show up, I was like, wow, like I'm really good at this manifesting stuff, but things just started to shift. And, and that was kind of like the start of it. Like, I think just noticing this lightness in my body, really.
Okay, so you mentioned your pattern of jumping from relationship to relationship and never really like taking the time for yourself. Can you talk a little bit about, because I know there was a period of time that you did kind of step away from that a little bit and really focus more on diving into yourself and finding what really calls to you in life. So can you talk a little bit about that shift?
Yeah, I went from relationship to relationship to relationship because I always thought that happiness wasn't I didn't know that happiness was self-generated. I always thought that if I had somebody to make me happy, then I would be happy.
Yeah.
I placed value on relationship because I always thought that I would get love and get just get love outside of myself. And that came from being in relationship with other people, with men. And so, I didn't recognize that pattern until just a few years ago, probably right around the time that we did the Landmark Forum, because, still I was like, but the first few relationships were the same, just different people, right?
Yeah.
Like the patterns were the same. And I was still the way that I was. And then when it shifted and when it broke was when I started doing this personal development stuff. And when I noticed, I didn't really notice it until after Eric and I, you met Eric, after Eric and I broke up, because the way that we broke up was so intense. And, I certainly am not the perfect person. I've made some really interesting and I would say sometimes unfavorable choices, but those were the choices that I learned from. And so with Eric, I know it was so healthy that I was like, there was still that underlying belief that I don't deserve this. I don't deserve this guy because it has been so good. Like, how do I self-sabotage? Right? How do I sabotage this so that I know that I don't deserve this relationship? And so I didn't recognize it then, but I recognize it now because I could, I can see, in hindsight, what was driving that behavior and what I did. And so, Eric and I, when we were together, it was very clear that for the both of us, we didn't want to get married. We didn't want to have kids. Like, we were both clear on that. And then one day he said, hey babe, you never told me what kind of ring you wanted. And I mentally flipped out. I was like, we've talked about this, and that comment that he made was the catalyst for my self-sabotage, because I was like, there's no way, like I could never.
That was like the thing you were looking for.
Yeah.
To mess it all up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And unconsciously, I took that statement and ran with it in terms of the self-sabotage. Mm-hmm. And so within literally a month, we were broken up. And it was like a divorce because we were living together. We had all our furniture together, but also, we had also just taken the Landmark Forum together. And so even our breakup was, in a sense, the healthiest breakup I'd ever experienced. Because after I did the Landmark Forum, I had the tools to really create and recreate the kind of break I wanted, and the kind of break that we wanted to co-create together. And so we did that. We ended things amicably. We, as a matter of fact, like a week after we broke up, we were on the phone with each other, dividing up our belongings like adults, in a very, very mature way. And after we broke up, I was single for 4 years, because I was like, there's no way that I can go back into a relationship being the person that I was and not be clear on how I want to show up for myself and for my partner. Yeah. Because just that underlying feeling that self-sabotage happens in all of my relationship, like I knew, after looking back, that pattern was driven by what happened and by my childhood, right? Like being neglected, not having a relationship, not having a healthy relationship with my father, not having a healthy relationship with my brother, not having good communication skills, just, and so I knew that was being driven by childhood patterns. And I was like, okay, so how do I really address this and heal it once and for all? So I was single for 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because knowing that all of that was going on and that you were essentially recreating like the experiences from your childhood in your relationships, right? But knowing that doesn't necessarily like, okay, now what?
Right. And, and it was that recognition that I was recreating these patterns from my childhood, that I could really confront and address those things within myself and really tackle them in a way that that I could show up, for the next person or for the next guy that I met. Because I was, I never, and I'll share why I never wanted to have kids, because like my deepest fear was that I was going to end up like my mom. And I was like, I am not going to put my child through that, because I could at that point I could see myself turning into her, like because of the toxicity. Like I was like, wow, this is the shit that I'm still in. I'm still in this shit. Yeah. And I was like, it wouldn't be fair to myself and to a kid for me to, like, I would never want to have another human being experience what I experienced with my mom.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm never going to have kids ever until I heal this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally get it. So you dove into being single and like huge self-discovery and figuring out how to transform all of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I say I was single, I wasn't in like a super serious relationship with anyone. I was really focusing on my growth. But I was dating. And so, I dated a guy for on and off, and he was the underlying, because Eric was so incredibly healthy, like our relationship was so different than the previous ones. This one was like a step back in time, because like he triggered me so much that I was like, this is the shit that I need to deal with. This is the stuff. And so being able to see that, that was also around the time that I was doing a lot of personal development work and a lot of seminar work. I was in the Landmark Forum and all of the Landmark courses, trying to get a handle on why I was the way that I was. And not that I was a bad person, I was just a person who was living the truth of my conditioned belief that I'm unlovable, I'm not wanted, I don't matter. And, you know, I wanted to really transform those deep-seated beliefs because I knew, like, in my heart of hearts that because of my, you know, law of attraction days, that I could really manifest all the things that I wanted. Like, I had evidence of both sides. I had evidence that I could still have those shitty relationships and, you know, being that person. And I also had the experience of attracting people and relationships who were, and even in friends, you know, like attracting relationships who were, on the same level in terms of energetically and wanting the same things. So I had like these two, and I kind of look at my life as like an experiment. I was like, I had these two results, like sets of results that I could really live into. And I was like, I just need to figure out how to heal and transform all of those deep-seated beliefs. And so I really took those 4 years of being single and just dove into all the personal development work that I could get my hands on. And that was a lot of landmark forum stuff, a lot of landmark stuff. I read a lot of books. In 2014, I read something like 26 books. And I did this, you know, online course called Feminine Power because that was also right around the time where I was like, God, I feel like I've been in my masculine energy for so long that I wanted to get reacquainted with my feminine energy. So I did this Feminine Power course that like shifted my whole context on my relationship with women. And so I really I wrote a book. Like, that's probably one of the most cathartic processes that you can ever go through. If you ever want to clear something out, like and confront things, you know, is to write it down and relive it over and over and over and really see it for what it was, you know. And so I really took those 4 years, and that was also the time that I moved up to Idlewild. I became a recluse. Like, I wouldn't recommend doing, you know, like people do that unless it calls to you. But, you know, and the catalyst for that was like in 2013, I was working like 80 hours a week. And I was like, God, this is like, I'm finding myself just being, you know, when I say I was in my masculine energy, that was what I was doing. It was like I was working 80 hours a week. I was not eating healthy. I was smoking all the time. And I was like, something's got to change. Like, I feel like we live our lives in waves and valleys and peaks and patterns that we, you know, kind of deal with and then don't deal with and then default. And so I was in my default mode and in my masculine energy. And one day I woke up and I just started looking for one-way tickets to anywhere. And I ended up settling for Bali because a friend of mine was planning a group trip. And I was like, okay, like I could go spend a couple weeks with friends. And then once they leave, I can be by myself. And I quit my job. I sold everything and packed my life into a suitcase and carry-on bag. And then I got back to California, did some traveling around the East Coast, reconciled with my family. Like, I had a huge breakthrough with my mom, and we can talk about that in a little bit too, if you'd like. And then that's when I moved to Idlewild, and I was single this whole time. And so I was really like, there was a lot of layers that was going on, but the focus was to get reacquainted with my own self-confidence and my own power, because I felt powerless in so many ways, especially after a relationship, because, you know, again, like I was placing value on the idea that somebody was always going to be there for me and take care of me. And that wasn't the case. You know, after we broke up, I found myself having to, again, like, be self-sufficient, which was fine because I've done it. I've done it a million times.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it was like, okay, like, why is it that I am the way that I am? And I just started focusing on that, on remembering who I am.
Yeah. Yeah, because it sounds like your path has been similar to mine in the relationship aspect. Like you're relying on someone outside of yourself to give you the confidence and the happiness and the like completion, right? Like someone
Right.
else is going to complete us.
Yes.
And then when that relationship ends, we're left feeling incomplete.
Exactly. Exactly. And then you have to go complete yourself. And
Yeah.
how do you do that? You know, for me, it was traveling by myself. It was writing a book. It was moving to the mountains. It was really just allowing myself the grace to surrender to my intuition and to my to my own femininity. Like I didn't, you know, it's to be able to step into my womanhood. Like I always referred to myself as a girl, and like once that like came forward, and I realized this in the feminine power course, it's like I've always referred to myself as that girl or little girl or, you know, something along those lines, and I had never referred to myself as a woman.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy shit. Like, you know, and going through that course, I was able to reconcile the idea that I was just this scared little girl walking through life, trying to figure it out. And what came forward through that course was like, wow, I can still acknowledge all the things that my younger self did and have gone through and all of the experiences that happened. And I can say, like, wow, I've blossomed into this really experienced woman. Like, when I say experienced, I mean just like life, you know, and growth and healing and confrontation, like letting things go, like allowing the spirit and the power of the great creator really come through me and work through me. And so once I was able to step into that, I recognized like how powerful I truly am. And then that's when things really started to shift for me.
Yeah, I think when we reconnected in Iris, the cabin, we were kind of like right here in the middle of stepping into that power.
Yeah.
And I remember just being so in awe of you and coming up there and just being like, this is what I want. Like, you know, you had that shelf that was just full of books, and you were like just so comfortable in like your pajamas or whatever. And I was like, this is so cool to just witness you in the middle of that. And I think we both had a lot of relationship stuff happening at that time too.
Yeah.
But it was so neat just to step into that and see like what was possible for
Oh, thank you for
women.
acknowledging that.
Yeah, and you really like, even just in having this conversation, like I realize how much you contributed to that process for me. Yeah, it's really cool.
Wow. Yeah, you know, around that time when I was in Idlewild, I called that my incubation period because I really hunkered down and just, you know, fed myself in a spiritual way, getting back into nature with books, with really good food, you know, and it was this sense that I was in a chrysalis. You know, I was that caterpillar that was now in the chrysalis and was really allowing the melting away or the transformation transformation to really happen.
Yeah.
And and the dissolving, because I think that's what happens. I don't know what really happens inside of a chrysalis, but that dissolving of our old self and the embracing of our new selves. And so I really recognized that was the time for me to just concentrate all of my energy and focus into developing myself as a brand new woman, because I felt like I shed that girl image and was stepping into a new comfortability and a new confidence in my own skin.
Yeah.
I mean, I would walk around town with my pajamas and my Uggs, and I didn't give a shit. Like, I just didn't care what people thought about that. And there's a sense of confidence that comes with that, where you're just like, this is where I'm at in life right now, and
Well,
I'm okay with it.
and you were in such a perfect place. Like, I feel like the mountains just allow that, like, you have permission to do that in the mountains where everyone's so different. And, it's not like San Diego where image is such a huge ordeal.
Yeah.
So it's so cool that you got.
And there are some days where I just don't give a shit, and I'm in my, like the other day I had a bun on my head that was like literally lopsided and I had my sweats on, and I was walking around town getting things done. I was like, I don't care. I don't care, because that's not who I am.
Yes, I have that experience so much more now that I've done so much work too, that we can just be, we give ourselves permission to just be whoever we are. And it doesn't mean that we look pretty every day or
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, I was, today I was like, oh, I wonder if I'm going to put my face on today. And when you're like, yeah, I'll probably be putting my face on, I was like, okay, I'll join you. But yeah, so that was, I felt like I was during that incubation period in Idlewild. I really felt like I was concentrating on just rediscovering this feminine power that is inherent in all women.
Yes.
And and really remembering like who we are as women and how powerful we are as creators and co-creators, and understanding that we are the most powerful creature on the planet. Just think about our ability to create a human being. Like, I'm having that experience right now. I'm like 6 months pregnant, and I never thought that I would ever have children. But it came out of like the healing of this idea that I am going to turn out like my mom. Like, I'm not my mom, I'm a completely different person, and I'm my own woman. And that took a lot of work.
Yeah, you're speaking to everything that the Rising Woman Project is about.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's just, and not everyone's story is going to be so, like, for example, my story and my going into my own transformation. I have a bunch of kids already, so I haven't been able to escape to a cabin and really take that time for myself, but I find the time now because I realize how important it is. And so I think it's like doing whatever it takes to put yourself on that path and that journey to discover your power and have you become the woman that's going to experience life at its fullest potential and in your fullest power.
Absolutely. And, now like I look at my life and I'm in awe of what I've been able to create and co-create with not just my partner, but with spirit. Like I always felt disconnected from spirit. And I always knew that if I could reestablish that foundation, that I could really co-create anything that I wanted to co-create and go after. And so, you know, I think the time in the mountains, even if it's just for a weekend or a week or however long you can get away, if that is, you know, what calls to you, I think all women should do a retreat in the mountains and like shut everything down.
Yeah. And even if it's not the mountains, it's like whatever it is that calls to your soul.
Exactly.
That's going to have you have that experience for yourself, whether it's the mountains, the beach, a weekend, a week, going to another country like you did, whatever it is, whatever you're able to do. It's just so important to just do it.
Yeah. And I think for me, like spirit, that experience is just having peace in my mind and peace in my heart. You know, like just knowing that I can go someplace that is my sanctuary, turn my phone off, you know, get disconnected from technology and just sit with myself in my own peace of mind and my own peace of heart, you know, and allowing myself that space to just be in it. Because I think that's the connection between being able to co-create is like having a really good sense of that peace of mind and that peace, like that center, you know, because the creation comes from going into that place and speaking to it and with it and saying, hey, like, let's do this, you know?
Yeah. And sometimes it seems so scary for someone who's just starting out to go into those places. What would you say to someone who's like, doesn't even know where to begin? And it's scary to think of going into those emotional and spiritual places that have been shut off for so long. Like, how do you even, you know, it feels like you're going to die for some people. Like, I know I had that experience when I first started, you know, really spending time with myself. Like, I felt like at times I was going to die.
And I would, you know, invite you to consider that is the part of you that needs to die.
Yes.
You know, and it's really scary because you've identified with that part of yourself for so long. And one of the things that came forward for me in the Feminine Power course was reconciling with my younger selves and saying, hey guys, like, you know, this is the end of the road for us for now. And saying, thank you for taking care of me. Thank you for being there for me. Thank you for, you know, just having the sense of gratitude that was the identity that got you through, and understanding that now you can lay that part of you to rest and say, hey, you know, like, take it easy. You can take a break now. Let me handle this. You know, let me, you know, in your infinite wisdom, like, you can go back and have conversations with your younger self from this place of knowing and your higher wisdom, and say, like, and make peace with all of those things, right? All of those scary times. I know that when I did that, the exercise, and I'll share this exercise with you. So it wasn't like in the course, so it wasn't like proprietary to the course. It was just something that came forward for me while I was taking the course. And what came forward was that I had a funeral for some of my younger selves that didn't serve me anymore. You know, like, I had to go through that experience. And the vision that I saw was, you know, my younger self in this casket and all of my other younger selves paying tribute to that part of me. You know, the parts that, you know, need to die, like those deep-seated beliefs of your 4-year-old who says, no, like, you don't love me, you know, or I'm unlovable, or I'm unworthy, or I'm not deserving of this, or I don't matter. Like those parts of you need to die.
Yeah.
And it's okay for you to pay tribute and pay service and allow yourself the grace to just say goodbye and thank it for its service, for what it did for you, for as long as it did, right? Because it did serve a purpose at some point.
Yeah.
But in your higher wisdom, you can recognize that it's not serving you any longer.
Yeah.
And so, the exercise that I did was going through and recognizing like how old I was when I made up those beliefs and saying, like, I'm sorry, but this is the end of the road for us. And then having that service, having that funeral service, like what, and lining up my other younger selves to pay tribute to it and say, hey, like, I know that, and you can have a eulogy for your younger self if you want to,
Yeah.
and, do it for all of those stages where that there are things that have been holding you back from that childhood or from that age. And so that was kind of like the exercise that I did to be able to to say goodbye to that little girl image.
Yeah.
And step into my own womanhood and step into my own wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And, from there, it's like and I know that there's more transformation to happen.
Right.
I'm not saying that I have everything that I want in the world, but I have everything that I absolutely need, and everything that I've asked for to come forward has really manifested itself in a way that like just completely has blown my mind.
Yeah. So obviously the exercise of writing letters and really creating the death of those old selves that are no longer serving you.
Yeah.
And then did you do an exercise around creating yourself as the woman that you are going to be now?
Yeah. And that is just, visioning the woman, the qualities that you want to live into, and really seeing who you are as a woman, who you want to live into and be. Like, I know for myself that, somebody asked me the other day, like, when you transpire, when your physical body dies, like, what's the legacy that you want to leave? And for me, it's always like the idea of myself has always been that I'm, a kind person, and that I want to leave this legacy of having treated people with dignity and respect no matter who they are. And so, it's very important to me to really live into those values. And so recreating yourself is like, what values do you live into? What values do you want to be known for? And recreating that foundation through the foundation of value and values, right? Because when you create that value system, it's now the value that you give out to the world. And that's the currency that you want to be known by.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you have to become a valuable person to give value into the world. And when you've shed that idea that you aren't valuable and reestablish yourself as somebody who is valuable, and how do you do that? You create values that you live into and that you stand by.
Yeah.
And that now becomes your currency in the world.
Yeah. And there's so many tools and resources out there to be able to do that. Because I know one of the experiences that I've had is coming to that place where I feel like I've shed so many things, but I've been so used to being in that mode that I don't even know what I want it to look like now. Like, there's this clean slate in front of me and I have no idea.
Yeah. That's a good place to be.
It's an awesome place to be. And I think, like, one of the things that I've done is found manifestos online, like women's empowerment manifestos, like, and you can even like write your own, but just to know that there's so many resources out there to help you do that. Like, don't be afraid of that place of starting over and nothingness. Like there's so many ways that you can start to create that for yourself.
Absolutely. And this, you know, and the value system, you know, just me talking about those values really goes back to the premise and the principles of the power of intention, right? Like the 7 faces of intention he talks about, and just living those experiences and living those principles. Like one of the principles of the power of intention is beauty and kindness and reciprocity, you know, and receptivity and creativity. And so like you can take those things and be in the practice of them, you know, whether that's one at a time or all at the same time. But it's like, okay, if you value kindness and you see yourself as a kind person, then go out and make sure that every day you do something kind for yourself.
Yeah.
First and foremost, and for others, right? Like build those experiences so that you have a library of evidence that you are a kind person.
Yeah.
That's what's valuable to you. If you value dignity and respect and treating other people that way and treating yourself that way and speaking to people that way, then that's the thing that you go out and build your library of experience of.
Yeah.
And that's how you become to know who you are as
actions,
a person.
Those. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to back up for a minute because you didn't finish the mending of your relationship with your mom.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I also want to be mindful of the time.
Yeah, it's 11:07, which is fine. We're a little bit over, but.
Yeah. So I want you to touch on that and just kind of share what that was like, and then tell us a little bit about where your life is now and what you're creating.
Sure. So, as you know, I mentioned in the beginning, I've never had a good relationship with my mom. Our relationship has always been very volatile, very unhealthy. My experience of her was that she was very abusive on all levels, mentally, spiritually, psychologically, sometimes physically. And, you know, my experience was that she was just a very vicious and toxic person, and we could never get along. And I remember, you know, even as a teenager, like, and I don't know how your experience was with your mom, but it like mine, it was like I would come home from school, we would fight, we would say some very vicious things. And, you know, like I'll give you an example of one of the things that I said to her. I was like, when you die, I will spit in your fucking grave. You know, like harsh things like those. That was the kind of viciousness that lived inside of my experience with her. And so I hated her. My experience of her when she walked into the room was that my blood would boil. Like as soon as she stepped in, like I would just get angry and, you know, just like I needed to get out of the room. Mm-hmm. And so, around the time that I left for Bali, and I had a moment in Bali where I was like, wow, like I had finally admitted to myself that I wanted to be a mom. Like that was probably like my highest destiny in life, is to be a mom.
I didn't realize that's when that happened for you.
Yeah. And one of the things that came forward, like the confronting stuff that came forward was, but what if you turn out like your mom?
Yeah.
Right. So that was a thing that I was really confronting. And also around that time, I was doing an inventory of like my friendships. And what I noticed was that I had a lot of male friends, like long-term male friends, but I didn't have any deep and meaningful friendships with women. Like I couldn't even tell you who, like I had no female friends.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. Like, what is it that's keeping me from having relationships with women? And I recognized that that I believed that women were like my mom. They would hurt me. They would, you know, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, and maybe even physically. This context that I had for women was that they're manipulative, they're catty, they're bitchy. Like, I can't be friends with those kinds of people, like, because I'm not that way, right? And so when I recognized that, I was like, wow, like, that's a huge, huge judgment. And for me to not have the kind of meaningful relationships that I, was witnessing through, I would go to the beach and I'd see girlfriends hanging out. It's like, oh, I don't have that. Like, God, I want that. And recognizing that there was something very special between relationships with women. And I realized I didn't have that, and I wondered why. And I figured out that it was directly related to this relationship that I had with my mom.
Yeah.
And so in 2013, after I went to Bali and, came back and did a little bit of travel, I went to see my mom. And I just had it in my mind that I was going to have a breakthrough with her. I was going to heal our relationship once and for all. And, like, all I wanted to have with her was a good relationship and a healthy relationship. I didn't want us to be the way that we always were with each other. Mm-hmm. And so when I got there, she lives in Kansas. When I got there, actually, I'll tell you, I was boarding the plane, and this was like 2 years after I'd done the Landmark Forum and all the stuff, and I was like, ooh, I have all the tools. I am going to show up, and I'm going to be in control of this situation. And I am going to recreate this situation and recreate the context of our relationship. It's going to be easy. It's going to happen with ease and grace. And I was like, and also, I'm a grown-ass woman. I am a different person. I can do this. So I'm on the plane, so I'm having these thoughts. I'm like, yeah, like, just my self-talk is, like this pep talk.
Yeah.
And so I get to Kansas, she picks me up, and there's no, hi, Linda, how are you? How was your trip to Bali? There was no, there were no pleasantries from my mom. Like, and the first thing she goes into is like all of her drama and all of her shit. And I was like, okay, this is my first test. We're gonna get this ride, and we're gonna, and we had a 2-hour drive from the airport to her house. So it's like, we're gonna get through this. And so part of her drama now, like, started to involve me. And within 24 hours, I was literally like white knuckle. Like, I picked her up from the restaurant to go home. So my mom owns a restaurant, and like, when we got there, I was like trying to get rested, and so I was like, I'll come pick you up when we're done. Blah 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 blah. And in the meantime, something happened between my aunt, where like my mom and my aunt were in like this deep drama. Like, without going into the whole story, like, they were in their shit, and I got involved in their shit, and now my mom was like, you're taking sides, and you're taking your aunt's side. So within 24 hours of me like being there, and when I went to go pick her up, like, I was literally like white knuckling the steering wheel, because I was so triggered by everything. And I was like, holy shit. Like, I ended up yelling at her. I was like, it was just an awful experience. So we defaulted right back into.
So did it put you right back into who you were as a child? Like, you were a kid again?
Yeah. Like, I was my 14, 15-year-old self.
Yeah.
I completely defaulted back to that person. But I had the awareness of that at the time. Yeah. Sometimes we don't have the awareness of that. So I had the awareness of that, and I was like, fuck. Okay, now I'm defaulting. I'm totally defaulting. And so anyhow, to make a long story short, like, that eruption caused us not to talk for 2 weeks. And I was clear that I wasn't going to leave because I had an open-ended ticket. I hadn't booked a return ticket anywhere. So because I was making stops along the way, and I was like, oh, I'll figure out where I'm going next when I get there. So I had an open-ended ticket, and I was like, I'm not going anywhere until I have a breakthrough or resolve this in some way or reconcile this in a way that I'm satisfied with. And so we didn't talk for 2 weeks. We were in our shit. We were defaulting, like ignoring each other, just completely in our pattern.
Yeah.
And so I was like, all right, I want to leave because Kansas is awful. It's an awful place to be. And also, like, it was causing like this physiological thing to happen in my body. I was breaking out in hives every day, and I was like, I can't fucking live like this. I gotta do something. And I thought that was totally related to what was happening. And so anyhow, I started, like getting back into my personal development stuff. I started re-listening to some audio that I had. I reached out to a good friend of mine, and you probably know him, Michael Mushlin.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, and I talked to Michael, and I said, Michael, I just don't know like how to transform this relationship. I just don't know what to do. And he sat me down, and he basically said, look, like, what is your mom doing right now? And I said, she's probably at the bar, because it was getting kind of late and the restaurant was closing. And he was like, have you ever considered like why she's self-medicating in the way that she does? And like, I was like, fuck, and then the compassion started to come in, and I was like, oh wow, like I never really thought about the impact that her choices have made, or that she's made, has had on her, because so I have 3 brothers, as I mentioned before. One of them doesn't talk to her at all, hasn't spoken to her in over 30 years. My brother Mike passed away in 1998, so she's still living with a lot of that guilt of like how she could have done things better for him. And my other brother is an addict who has been living with her, and she's been enabling him and all of that. And he has blamed her still for how his life has turned out. And he reminds her of this every single day, still to this day. And now I'm coming into the picture, and I haven't spoken to her in many years. Like when we speak, we're always arguing or whatever. And so, because she made some choices that weren't favorable for us when we were younger either. Like like our story of hers, that she abandoned us and she left us for weeks at a time with no food and no money and no resources. So that was the thing running us, right? And so finally, I was like, oh, I know that she's probably still living in the guilt of all of that. And so what came forward was just this sense of compassion, and like, oh wow, everybody that she's had a relationship with, people leave her. That's her experience. People leave her all the time. And now, like as I'm replaying all of the relationships that she's told me about, it's like people have left her, they've betrayed her, they've, stolen from her, they do all these things to her. And then I was like, God, when I was 16 and I left, I didn't say anything. I just left. I packed up my shit and left and never came back, you know? And I was like, oh, wow, like that really probably had an impact on her too. And finally it occurred to me that, holy, wow, like where can I take some responsibility in this? And so Michael and I got off the phone, and I decided that I would talk to her that night. And so when she came home, I said, hey, like, do you think we could talk? And she said, yeah, let me get a beer. Do you want one? I said, no, I don't need one. And so we sat down at the table. She cracked open her beer, and I just looked at her in her eyes, and I grabbed her hand and I said, hey mom, I'm really sorry for leaving the way that I did when I was 16. And I just want you to know that, that, it wasn't because of you. It was because I just needed to do that for myself. And she started crying. I started crying. And she was like, I'm sorry too for all the things that I did to you guys. And, I never worried about you because that was the woman that I raised.
Hmm.
And so we had this huge breakthrough. And for the next 2 weeks, we laughed together, we cooked together, we sang together. Like, I saw this brightness in my mom's eyes that I'd never seen before. And I was like, holy shit, this is the start of something brand new for us. Yeah. And by the end of our conversation, I just said, Mom, I just want to have a healthy and good relationship with you. I just want to be good to each other. If you're okay with that, can we do that? And that was my commitment to her, And so, and she was like, yeah, I would love that. And that was when I really was able to transform my relationship with my mom, and things have been, great since then. We talk a lot. And when I left, she called me and left me a message, and she was like, my best friend just left. And she'd never called me her best friend ever. I'd never had that experience with her. And so there was this huge transformation. And it was from then on that in that moment, I recreated my context about women, mm-hmm. and how I could have good, healthy, and meaningful relationships with a lot of women in my life. And that's when, we started reconnecting. And I have so many beautiful relationships with women that it's phenomenal how many powerful women I have in my life right now. And so from there, now my life is just blossoming and blooming and thriving. I'm married. I called in the relationship of my dreams.
Yes, I remember when that happened. We were in each other's lives at that time.
Yeah. And I was really excited. I was, in Idlewild. I just remember just saying, I'm ready. And, and
I think I saw you the day that you met him. Didn't you come to Nourish and visit me that day?
Yes.
Oh my God, I met this guy. And it was obviously we didn't know where it was going, but there was definitely instant something.
Yes. Because I remember when I came down the mountain, I was like, I'm going to see everybody, and I'm going to do things, take that weekend to just be in San Diego. And so I lined a lot of things up for that weekend. And my friend was like, yeah, you have to come and meet my boss. And I was like, okay, I'll come and meet your boss. And I never thought that it would turn out to be that we would get married, and we would have, I'm pregnant now, and I'm 6 months pregnant. We just moved to a beautiful house by the beach.
Amazing.
In La Jolla, California. And, and I have my podcast, which is something that I'm super proud of, and it's dedicated to empowering women who are, pursuing a career in comedy. I'm also studying and, living into being a stand-up comic myself. And and of course, living into my biggest destiny, which is being a mom. And it's just my life. Every day I walk on the beach and I just say thank you for the abundance that continues to flow to me and through me. And and just living into that gratitude of what I've been able to create.
So beautiful. I wish we could, maybe we can another time, but unpack the value, and there's just so much that lies in our relationships to our moms that I'm even still discovering now. Just what healing that relationship can open up for us in our lives. And it can look
Absolutely.
so different because obviously that's not possible for everyone, to actually go and create a new relationship with our mom. Like for me personally, that's a very limited thing that I would have to create, that I do create. But it just, there's so much there.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I don't think that your mom has to be here or
Yeah,
that it has to be a direct thing the way that I did with my mom, but it's just having a reconciliation with yourself and understanding that you can recreate the context by which you see your mom,
yeah,
right? And the experience that you have with her. And a lot of it for me, what I remember always is that context is everything.
yeah,
How you approach a relationship is basically what you bring to it within your context of that relationship. And my mom, she is part of my stand-up comedy stuff too, and I wouldn't be able to have that experience or share that experience if I hadn't healed that part of my relationship with my mom. Like, she calls me and says the craziest shit and shares the craziest stories. Like, oh my God, like how is it that I've missed this comedic part of you for so long, like,
yeah,
give me everything, just don't change, but she's still the same person.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's really phenomenal what you can do if you just reframe your perspective and context around your relationships.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So cool. Thank you for sharing that, because that was
You're
such a
welcome.
special, that's such a special and important piece to
Yeah.
all of it.
Yeah.
So just tell us now a little bit more about She Shed Comedy and where people can find you and what your commitment is with that and that.
Sure. So I have a podcast called She Shed Comedy, and it is dedicated to empowering and educating women who are pursuing a career in comedy. And really, it's a personal development course wrapped up in a podcast for funny women. That's kind of like how I would describe it, because it's not necessarily a comedic podcast, but it is an educational podcast, I would say. And people can find me on Facebook, on Instagram, and my handle is She Shed Comedy. And if you want to look me up and get personally connected, you can look me up as Linda Schwartz on Facebook. That's kind of my platform. So
And you don't have to
yeah.
be a comedian to connect with Linda and what she's sharing on her podcast.
Yeah. And you don't have to be a comedian. You can definitely just like personal development. And I have a really cool business series that I just released and I'm really proud of, where I brought in some phenomenal women to talk about mindset, to talk about money, to talk about public speaking. If you're interested in public speaking, like, she's a coach and she gives so many cool nuggets about that. And yeah, so I have some. I think I have great content, but
You
you
do.
can
And
be the judge of that.
I love that you bring so much fun and lightheartedness, and I love the comedy aspect, because I think definitely for myself, and I know for a lot of women, like, we take this life so seriously, the things
Girl.
that we go through so seriously, and like, it doesn't have to be that way.
Exactly. Context is everything. It really is. Like, you can see it through a lens of humor. Sometimes the deep stuff, it takes a little bit of time, but every now and again, or when you're ready, like, seeing it through a lens of humor is such a healing process too.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that, I am, and I'm doing my part in processing or the facilitation of healing.
Yeah, I think you
My
are.
comedy and my podcast. So yeah.
So cool. Thank you so much. I just
You're
love and adore and admire you so much. And I'm so thankful for you in my life. And so thankful that you came on to share so much of your story with all of us. So just thank you.
You're welcome. And the feelings are mutual. I adore and love you so much too. And I can't wait for another walk on the beach. So you'll have to come over and hang out with me again.
Yeah, we need to.
Before the baby comes.
Yes.
And after the baby comes.
Yes, absolutely. Cool. Well, thank you so much. And thank you all for watching and listening, and more soon.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.